The small black book fell open on page 13 when Dylan dropped it on my kitchen table, a page with strange symbols and instructions that made my skin crawl just looking at them. It started when my friend Dylan sent me a link to a Reddit post titled, "The Invitation Ritual." We were always looking for spooky stuff to do on weekends, just harmless fun to break the monotony of our small-town lives. The post claimed that if 5 friends performed this specific ritual at midnight during a new moon, we would be granted 1 wish each, but the post had a warning that made us hesitate. Make sure you follow every step precisely, or they will accept your invitation but not your terms. We laughed it off as typical internet drama. There were simple requirements: 5 white candles, a mirror placed on the floor, 5 drops of blood from each participant, and a personal item from everyone. The ritual needed to be performed in a house where someone had died, which was easy, because Dylan lived in his grandmother's old house where she had passed peacefully in her sleep. We decided to do it that weekend, more as a joke than anything else. Me, Dylan, Kai, Olivia, and Rowan all agreed to meet at Dylan's place around 11 p.m. on Saturday. I remember how cold it was that night despite being in the middle of summer. When I arrived, everyone was already there setting up in the basement. The air felt heavier than usual, and I noticed how the shadows seemed to stretch longer along the walls. I should have recognized these as warning signs, but instead, I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me because of what we were about to do. We arranged the candles in a perfect circle around the mirror, which reflected the basement ceiling and our 5 nervous faces peering down at it. Each of us placed our personal items in front of us. I chose an old watch my father gave me. Dylan used his lucky baseball cap. Kai brought a carved wooden figurine. Olivia contributed a silver ring, and Rowan added a pendant necklace. When the time came to add our blood, we each pricked our fingers with a sterilized needle, letting 5 drops fall onto our items. The Reddit post instructed us to recite a chant 3 times while holding hands in a circle around the mirror. We invite you into our world. We offer you our essence. Grant us our desires in return for our reverence. On the 3rd recitation, all the candles flickered simultaneously even though there was no draft in the sealed basement. We continued as instructed, each stating our wish aloud while placing our blood-marked item onto the mirror. I wished for success in my struggling music career. The others made similar wishes for love, money, and recognition. After completing the ritual, we were supposed to leave the items on the mirror until sunrise, then collect them and carry them with us for 7 days. Nothing dramatic happened immediately, which led to nervous laughter and jokes about wasting our Saturday night. We decided to watch a horror movie upstairs to salvage the evening. It was around 2 a.m. when we heard the first thump from the basement, like something heavy falling. We all froze, exchanging worried glances. Dylan suggested it was just the house settling, but we all knew better. None of us wanted to check the basement, so we turned up the movie volume and tried to ignore it. But the sounds continued, soft scratching noises followed by what sounded like whispers. When the power suddenly cut out, plunging us into darkness, we had no choice but to investigate. Using our phone flashlights, we cautiously made our way down the basement stairs. The temperature had dropped drastically, our breath visible in the beam of light. As we reached the bottom step, our lights illuminated the ritual space, and my heart nearly stopped. The mirror was now standing upright against the wall, though none of us had moved it. Our personal items were arranged in a straight line in front of it, and the candles, which should have burned out hours ago, were still lit but with flames that burned blue instead of orange. Olivia wanted to leave immediately, but Dylan insisted we finish what we started by ending the ritual properly, which meant retrieving our items at sunrise as instructed. We agreed to wait it out together upstairs, too afraid to leave the house entirely. No one slept that night. We jumped at every creak and groan of the house, huddled together on Dylan's living room couches. Around 4 a.m., Rowan went to use the bathroom, but came running back moments later, face pale as chalk. He claimed he saw someone standing in the hallway, a figure that vanished when he turned his flashlight toward it. By 5 a.m., we were all seeing things, shadows moving independently of any light source, brief glimpses of faces peering around corners, and handprints appearing in the condensation on the windows, even though none of us had touched them. When sunrise finally came, we rushed down to the basement, desperate to end the ritual and leave. But what awaited us sent ice through my veins. The mirror was shattered, fragments scattered across the floor, yet somehow each piece still reflected something despite there being nothing to reflect. Our personal items were gone. According to the Reddit post, this was not supposed to happen. The items should have remained where we left them, charged with the power to grant our wishes. Kai started crying, convinced we had done something terribly wrong. We searched the entire basement, but found nothing. Defeated and terrified, we left Dylan's house, promising to regroup later after getting some sleep. But sleep never came for me, and I doubt it did for any of the others. Within days, strange things began happening to each of us. Our wishes were coming true, but not in the way we wanted. I got a call from a major record label, but the night before my big meeting, I lost my voice completely. Doctors found unusual growths on my vocal cords that they couldn't explain. Dylan, who wished for athletic prowess, broke both legs in a freak accident but was offered a coaching position out of sympathy. Kai, who wanted love, began sleepwalking to her phone at night, having entire conversations with someone none of us could see or hear. Olivia and Rowan experienced similar twisted versions of their wishes. And then we started seeing them, the entities we had invited. They appear in reflective surfaces, just glimpses at first, faces not quite human watching us from mirrors, windows, glossy phone screens, or any reflective surface. They never show themselves fully, just enough to let us know they are there, observing, following. We tried contacting the Reddit user who posted the ritual, but the account had been deleted. Further research led us to similar stories spanning centuries across different cultures, all with the same outcome: entities that grant wishes but corrupt them, feeding off the despair of their victims. Now, 3 weeks later, we have learned that the ritual was never about wishes at all. It was a summoning, an invitation for these ancient beings to enter our world using our blood and personal items as anchors. The items we offered were tokens of our identities, and by marking them with our blood, we essentially signed ourselves over. Last night, I saw one of them clearly for the first time. I was brushing my teeth, deliberately avoiding looking at the mirror when the lights flickered. When they stabilized, my reflection was no longer my own. The face staring back had my features but stretched, distorted, with eyes that were empty black pools. It smiled at me with too many teeth. I know now what the warning meant. They accepted our invitation, our offering, but not our terms. They are here for something else, something more than granting twisted wishes. They are replacing us, one by one, stepping through the mirrors into our world, while pushing us into theirs. Olivia disappeared yesterday. Her family does not remember her, but we do. Something that looks like Olivia still walks among them, but we know it's not her. I am writing this as a warning. Do not invite them in. If you see a ritual on Reddit or anywhere else, ignore it, because I think they are coming for me next, and soon there will be no one left who remembers us as we truly were. I was 16 when the homeless kids started going missing in my town, and I was one of them. Not missing, I mean. I was one of the homeless kids. Most people in Millwood never noticed us. We were like ghosts drifting between abandoned buildings and highway underpasses, invisible until we asked for spare change. Then suddenly we were too visible, too much of a nuisance. The first to vanish was Eric. He had been sleeping in the old train yard for almost a year. One morning his stuff was there, but he was not. Nobody really cared except us, the other throwaway teens. The police barely took a report. Then Caitlin disappeared a week later. She and I used to share food sometimes. The last time I saw her, she told me she had seen strange lights behind the abandoned Sunnyvale factory, where many of us took shelter during winter. She said she heard voices too, whispering from the drains. I laughed it off. Kids like us, we got paranoid sometimes. You had to, living on the streets. But then, 3 more disappeared within days. Jesse, Marcus, and Zoe. All gone without a trace. The local newspaper finally ran a small story, tucked away on page 6. Missing troubled teens, probable runaways. We were not runaways. We were thrown away, or escape from something worse. I started noticing a pattern. The kids who vanished had all mentioned the same thing before disappearing, something about strange lights and whispers coming from unlikely places. I began sleeping with one eye open, clutching the small knife I kept for protection, listening for any unusual sounds in the darkness. That is when I first heard it too, a faint whisper calling my name from the storm drain near my sleeping spot. The whispers came every night after that, always starting around 3 in the morning. Sleep would pull away from me like water circling a drain as the soft voice pronounced each syllable of my name. Nobody had called me by my full name in years, not since I left home. How did it know? I changed sleeping spots 3 times, but it always found me. The other street kids were getting nervous too. We started traveling in groups, watching out for each other. There were only 8 of us left now in Millwood, huddled together in an abandoned office building downtown, taking turns keeping watch. That is when we started noticing the people following us. They looked normal enough from a distance, men and women in plain clothes, but something was off about them. Their movements were too fluid, too precise. Their eyes never blinked, and they always stood just at the edge of our vision, watching. One afternoon, I was scrounging for food behind the grocery store when I spotted one of them, a woman in a beige coat standing perfectly still by the loading dock. I could have sworn her feet were not quite touching the ground. When she smiled at me, her mouth opened too wide, stretching beyond what a human jaw should allow. I ran. Back at our hideout, Carlos was frantic. He had seen someone too, a man outside the library whose neck had turned almost completely around to watch him pass. We decided to approach Officer Mercer, the only cop who had ever shown us any kindness. He listened to our story with growing concern, not dismissing us like the others had. He promised to do some digging, said there might be a connection to something that happened in Millwood 30 years ago, another string of disappearances that no one talked about. He told us to stay together and meet him the next day. Officer Mercer never made it to our meeting spot. We found his badge in the alley behind the police station, lying in a small puddle that smelled faintly of chemicals, not water. No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone, like the others. That night, we barricaded ourselves in the old office building, pushing desks against the doors and windows. Jake managed to get his hands on an old ham radio and was trying to reach anyone outside town who might help. The town had always felt isolated, but now it felt cut off completely, as if Millwood existed in its own pocket of reality. Strange lights began appearing in the sky above town, pulsing in patterns that made my eyes hurt. The whispers grew louder, no longer coming just from drains but from vents, pipes, even the cracks in the walls. They were no longer just saying my name, they were making promises now. Promises of warmth, of safety, of never being forgotten or overlooked again. Some of the others admitted they heard them too. Different promises for different people, but all so tempting when you have nothing. Little Mia, only 14, was the first to give in. We fell asleep in shifts, and during my watch, I caught her sliding a desk away from the window. Her eyes were unfocused, dreamy. She said they were calling her to the factory, that her parents were waiting there. Her parents who had thrown her out a year ago. I tried to stop her, grabbed her arm, but she moved with sudden strength, throwing me against the wall. By the time I recovered, she had slipped out the window. Carlos and I went after her, following her small form as she walked with unnatural purpose towards Sunnyvale Factory. We called her name, but she never turned around, never hesitated as she approached the dark building looming against the night sky. The factory doors were wide open when Mia reached them, spilling sickly yellow light onto the cracked pavement. Carlos and I hesitated at the edge of that light, watching as Mia walked inside without breaking stride. We should have run back for the others, should have stayed away, but we could not leave her. The moment we stepped into that light, the whispers became a chorus in my head, so loud I could barely think. Inside, the factory was transformed. What should have been an empty, decaying industrial space was alive with pulsing, organic architecture. The walls breathed, the floor rippled like water. And there were pods, hundreds of translucent pods attached to the ceiling and walls, each containing a floating human form. I recognized Eric in one, his face peaceful as if sleeping. Caitlin in another. Officer Mercer, too. At the center of it all stood figures that only resembled humans in the vaguest sense, tall and thin with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their skin shifted and flowed like mercury, and where their faces should have been were just smooth, reflective surfaces that showed distorted versions of our own terrified expressions. One of them held Mia gently by the shoulders, tilting its non-face toward her. She was smiling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Carlos bolted forward to grab her, and the creature extended an impossibly long arm, touching his forehead with what might have been a finger. Carlos froze mid-stride, then slowly relaxed, his panicked expression melting into the same peaceful smile as Mia. I backed away as they both turned to look at me. The creatures made no move to stop me as I stumbled back toward the door. They did not need to chase me. They knew what waited outside. As I burst out of the factory, I found myself surrounded by the blank-eyed people we had been seeing around town, standing in a perfect circle, their two wide smiles greeting me. They let me escape that night. I understand now that it was deliberate, that I was meant to be their messenger. I ran until my lungs burned, somehow breaking through their circle and racing back to warn the others. But our hideout was already empty when I returned, desks still barricading doors that no longer needed guarding. Everyone was gone. I fled Millwood that same night, hitchhiking my way 3 states over before I felt safe enough to stop looking over my shoulder. That was 7 years ago. I have a life now, a job, even an apartment with my name on the lease. But every few months, I see the reports, small articles buried in local papers or obscure internet forums. Clusters of missing people, always the forgotten ones, the overlooked, homeless, runaways, those society has already given up on. And the pattern follows the same strange lights in the sky that I saw above Millwood. I have tried to warn authorities, but who listens to a former homeless kid with a wild story? Last week, I saw one of them for the first time since I escaped. A woman standing across the street from my apartment building, her movements too fluid, her smile too wide. Our eyes met, and inside my head, the whispers started again. I am packing my bag as I record this, leaving everything behind once more. But I know the truth now. They were not taking us because we were homeless. They were taking us because we were alone, isolated, unwanted, the perfect specimens to study, the perfect humans to harvest without society noticing. And I know something else too. What I saw in Millwood was just one outpost. They are everywhere, in every city, every town, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to expand their collection. So if you hear whispers calling your name, if you see someone whose movements seem just slightly wrong, do not run. Running marks you as prey. Find others, build connections, make sure people would notice if you vanished, because they only take the forgotten ones, and as long as someone remembers you exist, you might just survive. I never believed my brother Ethan when he said he could see auras, these colorful halos of energy surrounding people that supposedly revealed their true nature. He claimed it started when he was 7, after a high fever that kept him bedridden for days. Our parents dismissed it as an active imagination, and I teased him relentlessly about it throughout our childhood. He would whisper to me about the gentle blue glow around our mother, the fierce red surrounding our father when he was angry, and the shifting yellow-green clouds that followed our teachers. I laughed it off as his weird way of reading people, something to make him feel special. As we grew older, he mentioned it less, and I figured he had outgrown the fantasy. We drifted apart in our teenage years, as siblings often do. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending more time alone and avoiding social gatherings. I was the opposite, thriving in crowds and building a wide circle of friends. When I left for college, we barely spoke except during holiday gatherings, where he would watch me from across the room with a strange, worried expression. I remember our last Christmas together before everything changed. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting another drink. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously between me and something invisible over my shoulder. I, Alex, asked him what was wrong, and he just stared, his voice barely audible when he finally spoke. I will never forget the way his hands trembled as he reached toward me but stopped short of touching my shoulder. My brother Ethan, who had always been the sensitive one, the kind one, looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes and whispered, "My God, when did it happen? You're stained with evil, and it's growing darker every time I see you." I laughed it off at first, of course, called him crazy and walked away with my drink, rejoining the party and pushing his words to the back of my mind. But that night, lying in my childhood bed, I couldn't shake the look of horror on his face. What did he think he saw? I wondered if he was developing some kind of mental illness, and made a mental note to speak to our parents about getting him help. The next morning, he avoided me entirely, leaving the house before dawn and not returning until late. Our parents noticed the tension but attributed it to typical sibling rivalry. I returned to college a few days later, relieved to escape the uncomfortable situation. That's when the nightmares began. Vivid dreams where I stood before a mirror, watching as inky black tendrils crawled beneath my skin like veins, spreading from my chest outward. In the dreams, I would smile at my reflection as the darkness consumed me, feeling a strange satisfaction as it did. I started noticing small changes in my daily life too. The way my classmates would unconsciously shift away from me in lecture halls, how my roommate's cat, once friendly, now hissed and fled whenever I entered a room. The plants on my windowsill withered despite regular care. My girlfriend of 2 years suddenly broke things off, unable to articulate why beyond saying that being around me made her feel cold inside. I dismissed these incidents as coincidences, stress from finals, my imagination working overtime because of my brother's stupid comment. Then came the incident with my professor. I had always been a good student, but I was struggling in his class and needed to pass to maintain my scholarship. During office hours, I found myself alone with him, pleading for extra credit. Something shifted in me as he refused, a surge of intense anger that felt foreign yet familiar. Without thinking, I heard myself suggest that it would be terrible if his wife found out about his affair with a graduate student. I had no knowledge of any affair. The words came from nowhere, spilling from my mouth with cold precision. But the color drained from his face immediately, confirming what had been a complete shot in the dark. He stared at me with the same fear my brother had shown, asking how I could possibly know that. I remember feeling a strange euphoria as I watched him squirm, a sense of power I had never experienced before. I left his office with a guaranteed A and a growing realization that something was indeed changing within me. I called my brother that night, something I hadn't done in months. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for my call. I didn't even have to explain. He just listened to my breathing for a moment before saying, "You felt it today, didn't you? The darkness moving inside you, it's feeding on your choices." The conversation that followed lasted hours, with my brother explaining things that sounded impossible yet resonated with a terrible truth. According to Ethan, most people had auras in gentle colors that reflected their essential nature, but occasionally, rarely, he would see something else entirely. A parasitic energy that attached itself to people who had, knowingly or unknowingly, opened themselves to it. It wasn't possession, not exactly. More like a gradual corruption that grew stronger with each moral compromise, each selfish action, each moment of cruelty or manipulation. He said it had started as just a small shadow around my heart the summer before college, barely noticeable. But now it had spread throughout my aura, turning what was once a healthy orange glow into something dark and pulsing. The worst part, he told me with a trembling voice, was that these energies were sentient in their own way. They were aware of those who could see them, and they did not like being seen. After that conversation, I became hyper-aware of my thoughts and actions, noticing how easily cruelty came to me now, how I could identify people's weaknesses with uncanny precision, and felt an instinctive urge to exploit them. I started having blackouts, losing hours or sometimes entire evenings, waking up with no memory but a deep satisfaction, like a hunger had been temporarily sated. My academic performance soared as I somehow always knew exactly what to say to manipulate situations to my advantage. People who stood in my way experienced unlikely misfortunes, from public humiliations to actual accidents. I never explicitly wished these things upon them, but I couldn't deny the dark pleasure I felt when they occurred. I tried to fight it at first, calling my brother daily for support. He gave me crystals, herbs, meditations, anything he thought might help cleanse my aura. Nothing worked. In fact, things got worse after each attempt, as if the darkness was punishing me for trying to expel it. 6 months after that Christmas conversation, my brother called in a panic. He had been researching my condition and found mention of similar cases throughout history, always with the same progression. The darkness would continue to grow until it completely consumed the host, turning them into something no longer fully human, a vessel for an ancient malevolence that fed on suffering. The final stage, he told me with a broken voice, was when the darkness became aware enough to protect itself by eliminating those who could see it for what it was. He was calling to say goodbye, that he had to distance himself completely for his own safety. His last words to me were, "I love you, but you're not my sibling anymore. Whatever is wearing your face now is something else entirely." That was 3 years ago. I haven't spoken to my brother since, though I have kept tabs on him from afar. He moved across the country, changed his name, cut ties with our family. Our parents think he's had some kind of breakdown, but I know he's simply trying to survive. They don't understand why I don't seem concerned, why I never join in their efforts to find him. How could I explain that their son is protecting himself from their other child? My life has been remarkably successful since embracing what I am. I graduated with honors, secured a prestigious position at a financial firm, and have accumulated wealth and influence that someone my age shouldn't possess. People are drawn to me despite an inexplicable unease in my presence. I have everything I thought I wanted, yet I feel nothing beyond a constant, gnawing hunger for more. The blackouts are more frequent now. I wake up with mysterious stains on my clothing that I don't question. Stray animals flee from me. Children cry when I wave at them. My reflection sometimes shows me something other than my own face, just for a flickering moment. I started writing this as a confession, perhaps, or a warning, but I realize now it's neither. It's an announcement, because the thing inside me, the darkness my brother saw, is almost complete now. I'm the last piece of the original me, a tiny fragment of consciousness that still remembers being human, still feels horror at what I've become. This fragment grows weaker daily. Soon it will be gone, and whatever has been gestating inside me will emerge fully formed. I know now why my brother was so afraid. He was right about everything. If you meet someone with eyes a bit too dark, a smile that never quite reaches those eyes, someone who makes you feel cold without knowing why, someone who seems to feed on the discomfort and pain of others, run. Don't look back. And pray they didn't notice you noticing them. Because now I can see the auras too, and am so very, very hungry.